In today's video, we are going to go over section 1.2 from the textbook, which is called Symbolic Logic. A lot of the stuff that we learn in this section is going to be really important, so I would suggest that you take good notes, make sure you have a clear understanding of the four symbols that we're going to learn today. So this section is all about symbolic logic, which is based on statements. All logical reasoning is based on statements. And the definition of a statement is a sentence that's either true or false. So it's not an opinion, it's not a question. So if it says something like, I think Chick-fil-A is the best restaurant, that's not a statement, that's my opinion. Right, so you want to keep a lookout for words like that, like best or favorite or something like that, that lets you know that it's an opinion and not a statement. We'll be talking a lot about compound statements in this section, so I wanted to give you another definition of a compound statement. It says a compound statement is a sentence that consists of two or more statements separated by logical connectors. Some examples of logical connectors are like the word and, the word or, and the words like if and then. Alright, so let's look at a couple of sentences and we'll determine which of the following are statements, and then we'll talk about why they're not statements. So the first sentence says Apple manufactures computers. So yes, that is a statement. That is a fact. So yes, that is a statement. Let's see if I can use a better color. Oh, they're all showing up bad. There we go. This is a statement. The next sentence says Apple manufactures the world's best computers. Well, that is not a statement. That is an opinion. So that is not a statement. Number 3 says, did you buy a Dell? This is a question, so it is not a statement. And then number 4 says, a $2,000 computer that is discounted 25% will cost $1,000. Well, this is a statement, but you may notice that this is a false statement. If it was down to $1,000 from $2,000, that would be discounted 50% or half off. So this is a statement, but it's false. So it's okay if you have a sentence, or excuse me, a statement that's false. It's still a statement. Just because it's not true doesn't mean it's not a statement. Alright, so let's get into the symbols. This is our first symbol that we're learning today. It's the symbol for the negation. So you can see it's kind of like a little squiggle. The official word for this, you have this symbol on your keyboard. It should be right next to your 1 button if you're on a normal computer. But this symbol is called a tilde. So we read this as not P. So it says the negation of a symbol, let me start over. The negation of a statement is the denial of the statement and is represented by the tilde symbol. The negation is frequently formed by inserting the word not. So let's find the negation of the following statement. So the statement P is, it is snowing. So we need to negate that. Alright, so if we're looking at not P, that would be, it is not snowing. So that would be the negation of that statement. So not P is, it is not snowing. And just wanted to point this out, this is in your textbook. It says, because the truth of the negation depends on the truth of the original statement, a negation is classified as a compound statement. On this slide we have some quantifiers. These are quantified statements that are negations of each other. These are just going to help you out for the more complex statements, finding the negation of a more complex statement. So you can see here the way the arrows are drawn. The phrases in blue are negations of each other, and the phrases in red are negations of each other. So I'm going to keep pulling back up this picture as we go through some examples and find some negations. Here we have an example. It says, write a sentence that represents the negation of each statement. These first two are really easy. The first sentence says the senator is a Democrat. So the negation of that would be the senator is not a Democrat. And then part B, once again, pretty straightforward. Here we have the sentence, we're finding the negation. The senator is not a Democrat, so the negation of that would be the senator is a Democrat. Looks like I forgot to capitalize Democrat, but maybe you'll forgive me for that. All right, let's look at some more complex examples. Part C says some senators are Republicans. All right, so if some of them are Republicans, we're finding the negation of that. So once again, I'm going to pull up our little picture here. Some senators are Republicans. So you can see that's the bottom right, or sorry, the bottom left sentence. Some senators are Republicans. So the negation of that would be no senators are Republicans. Now part D. Our sentence is all senators are Republicans. And once again, you may not need to use this picture to help you find the negation. You may be able to do it on your own. This is just to help you if you need it. So the negation of this statement, all senators are Republicans, that's the top left sentence on this little picture. So the negation of that would be some senators are not Republicans. All right, parts E and F, same question here. We're finding the negation. All right, so part E says no senator is a Republican. All right, so no senator is a Republican. That's the top right sentence on our little picture. So the negation of that would be some senators are Republican. So the negation of no senators are Republicans is some senators are Republican. And then our last sentence, some senators are not Republican. All right, once again, you just find the sentence that matches this, which is the bottom right sentence. So the negation of that would be all senators are Republican. All right, so we've learned our first symbol, which was the negation. That was that little tilde or that little squiggle. Now we're on to our second symbol. This symbol represents a conjunction. So the conjunction, you can see it's a little caret. You have this symbol on your keyboard. You just hit like shift and then it should be the 6 button if you're on a regular computer. All right, so, but we read this as P and Q. All right, so this little symbol here, when you read this, you say and. Oh, wow. Excuse my handwriting here. So that's and. So it says, consider the statement, Norma Ray is a union member and she is a Democrat. This is an example of a conjunction because it uses the word and it's considered a compound statement because it has two statements and it's connected by that word and. So let's look at an example with conjunctions. It says, use the symbolic representations below to express the following compound statements in symbolic form. So basically just take what they let you know P and Q are, and then we're going to take this sentence and then represent it in symbolic form. So it says the statement P is Norma Ray is a union member. The statement Q is Norma Ray is a Democrat. So here we have a sentence that says Norma Ray is a union member and she is a Democrat. So we see that word and. That's going to be where we put our little caret symbol. And if you look at the first part here, the first part of that sentence, Norma Ray is a union member, that's P. And then we have our connecting word and, our conjunction. And then the statement she is a Democrat, which is Q. So as a symbol, or in symbolic form, this is this P, and then our little caret, Q. All right, and then once again, we have another sentence. It says Norma Ray is a union member, and she is not a Democrat. All right, so kind of similar sentence here. Once again, we have this word and, which tells us this is a conjunction. The only difference here is that we have this word not. All right, so Norma Ray is a union member, that's P. And then we have our little caret for the and. And then since it says she's not a Democrat, that's a negation. So we're going to use our little squiggle, our little tilde symbol. So P and not Q. P and not Q. So that would be how you would represent this compound statement in symbolic form. Now we're moving on to our third symbol, which is the symbol for a disjunction. Just like how a conjunction was the word and, a disjunction is the word or. So the disjunction symbol just looks like a V. The way I keep these sort of straight in my head is that symbol for and, the symbol for conjunction, was like a little caret. And the way that I think about it is that this kind of looks like an A for and. And then that helps me to remember which one is the conjunction symbol, and then I can remember that the other one is the disjunction symbol. All right, so it says when two statements are connected by the word or, a disjunction is formed. Of course, disjunctions are also compound statements because they are connecting two different statements with the word or. And here, the word or is a little bit more complicated. There are two different ways that you can interpret the word or. We have what's called the inclusive or, and then we also have what's called the exclusive or. So we're going to go through those, and then I'll tell you which one that we're going to use in this class. All right, so let's say that we have the statement A or B. You can imagine that this is like apples or bananas. All right, so the inclusive or means A or B or both. So let's say that your options are apples or bananas. The inclusive or means you could have apples or apples and bananas. The exclusive or means either A or B, but not both. So you could exclusively only have apples or bananas, but you can't have both. So in this next example, we're going to be considering two statements, and then we're going to figure out what the disjunction means. So it says statement P is Caitlin is a registered Republican. Statement Q is Pocky is a registered Republican. And our question here is, what does P or Q mean? So remember that little V there, that's our symbol for or. So what does P or Q mean here? Well, of course, we know that it really depends on if we're talking about the inclusive or the exclusive or. So if we're talking about the inclusive or, remember that means P or Q or both. So for the inclusive or, that means Caitlin is a registered Republican, or Pocky is a registered Republican, or they are both registered Republicans. And if we're talking about the exclusive or, we know that that means P or Q, but not both. So that would mean either Caitlin is a registered Republican or Pocky is a registered Republican. They're not both registered Republicans. So how do we know which one to use? In this class, we will always use the inclusive or. So we're always going to use the or that means A or B or both. Now that we have a grasp on which version of the word or that we're going to use, and we're comfortable using our and symbol, let's look at an example where we involve all of our symbols. So it says, using the symbolic representations below, express the following compound statements in words. All right, so P is the statement, Juanita is a college graduate. Q is the statement, Juanita is employed. So part A, it says we're looking at P or Q. Remember this symbol right here. That's our symbol for a disjunction, which is or. And then part B is looking at P and Q. So that's our symbol for a conjunction, which is and. All right, so let's look at our disjunction first. So if we're looking at P or Q, that's going to mean that Juanita is a college graduate or Juanita is employed, or she's both a college graduate and employed. So I'm sure you could make this into a shorter sentence. Your sentence doesn't have to look exactly the same as my sentence as long as you get the same information across. All right, now let's look at the more simple one, P and Q. If we're looking at the statement P and Q, that's going to mean Juanita is a college graduate and she is employed. Right now, let's look at some statements where we combine all three of our symbols that we've learned. All right, so P or not Q. So not Q, that's going to mean that she's not employed. So this is going to be Juanita is a college graduate, or Juanita is not employed, or she's both a college graduate and unemployed. And then part D, our last question, says not P and Q. So not P. Not P would be, or not P would mean she's not a college graduate. All right, so this would be Juanita is not a college graduate and she is employed. And our last symbol that we're going to learn today is the symbol for the conditional. This is also sometimes called the implication. All right, so the conditional just looks like an arrow and it represents statements of the form if P then Q. So any statement of that form is called a conditional or an implication. So the statement if P then Q is symbolized by P implies Q. So when we see that little arrow there, we read that as P implies Q. Sometimes whenever we're using conditionals in our everyday speech, we might omit the word then. So for example, we may say, if it is raining, the streets are wet. We might omit the word then. So instead of saying, if it is raining, then the streets are wet. And alternately, we can also sort of rephrase if-then statements. So it says, the conditional if P then Q can also be phrased Q if P. So for example, we might say, the streets are wet if it is raining. So we sort of switch around the order and say the Q part first. Let's look at a few homework problems before we end the video. So this comes straight off of your homework, section 1.2 homework problem number 2. It says, consider the symbolic representations given below. P is the statement, a shape is a square. Q is the statement, a shape is a rectangle. We're asked to translate the following sentence into symbolic form. Now, don't be afraid to reword these statements. A lot of these statements are not going to be in the correct form. They're not going to sound like if-then statements, and you'll have to sort of rephrase them to use the same wording as the statements from P and Q. So the statement here is all squares are rectangles. All squares are rectangles. So to me, I could rephrase that as, if a shape is a square, then it is also a rectangle. If a shape is a square, then it is also a rectangle. So that means the same thing as all squares are rectangles. Now this may take you a little bit of time to get comfortable rephrasing these statements. So if you need to pause the video to make sure that you understand the connection between these two statements, now would be a good time to do that. Now, since we have this in the form of an if-then statement, we can now look and sort of translate this into symbolic form. If a shape is a square, so that's if P, then it is also a rectangle, which is the statement Q. So that's if P, then Q. Now we know that that's the same thing as P implies Q. So I'm circling the correct answer here. Very similar homework problem. This is number 4. It says the statement P is a person is a convicted felon, and the statement Q is a person is eligible to vote. And our statement that we're trying to translate into symbolic form is no convicted felon is eligible to vote. All right, so I'm going to try to translate this into an if-then statement. So this says no convicted felon is eligible to vote. So if you are a convicted felon, then you are not allowed to vote. So again, we're rephrasing this using the same wording from our statements. So if you are a convicted felon, then you are not eligible to vote. So that's if P, then not Q. If P, then not Q. So this would be P implies not Q. And then our last homework problem that we're going to go to, I just wanted to go over this one because it has the parentheses, which kind of confuses some people. We have 4 symbolic representations here. P is the statement you do drink. Q is the statement you do drive. R is the statement you are fined. And then S is the statement you go to jail. All right, so our sentence that we're trying to translate here is, if you drink and drive, you are fined or you go to jail. So you can tell they've omitted the word then here. So if you wanted to put it back in, you could. So if you drink and drive, then you are fined or you go to jail. So right now what we know is that we're going to have an arrow, which is obvious. All of our choices have arrows. All right, so since this is a conditional, it has that form of an if-then statement, and we know that that's going to have an arrow in there somewhere. All right, so if you drink and drive, so you drink and you drive, so that's P and Q. And then the last part says you are fined or you go to jail. So that is R or S. All right, so now we can look and just see which one matches that correct order, P and Q and R or S, which is the fourth option here, which is our correct answer. So don't let the parentheses mess you up. This is just grouping those together, just saying that P and Q goes together, and then R or S goes together.